Hello everyone, welcome to Java Tutorials. My name is Kishore. In this video, we will discuss where exactly the supercall statement is useful in real world use case scenario. To understand the use case of supercall statement, I'm going to use the same example which I used in inheritance, where I discussed about hospital management system that will have three types of users like patient, doctor, nurse, and the hospital management system has to take care of maintaining the user details. For that, patient will have some properties, doctor will have some properties, and nurse will have some properties. However, we do not need to repeat their properties in every class. For that reason, what we did was we understood that patient will have name, phone number, issue. Doctor will have employee ID, specialization, name, phone number, license number, salary. And a nurse will have name, phone number, employee ID, salary, and shift. We did create person class mentioning that it will have name and phone number. And patient is going to extend the person class so that it gets name and phone number. And patient will have a specific property called issue. Then we didn't create doctor class extending person because doctor and nurse will have some common properties like employee ID and salary. For that reason, we created an employee class extended with person, and then doctor and nurse extended the employee class. What we did was we just created the properties in person class and then setters and getters, but we didn't create constructor to initialize those properties. Then we created employee class extending person, and we wrote only two properties, ID and salary, and setters and getters of ID and salary. Then in patient class, we extended person and wrote these two variables, then their setters and getters. After that, the doctor class extends employee, and the doctor will have specific properties and their respective setters and getters. Later, the nurse class extending employee, and it will have a specific property shift and its setters and getters. In none of the subclasses, we created the constructors to initialize the properties, and even in superclass also, we didn't create any constructor to initialize the properties. What we did was we created the object of doctor and initialized the doctor related properties, including the name and phone number, which were inherited from the person, then ID and salary, which were inherited from the employee class, and then specialization and license number. The patient object we initialized by calling the setter methods available from the patient class as well as from the inherited method. Similarly, the nurse object also we created and initialized the nurse related properties by calling the setter methods available in nurse class and that are inherited from the parent class. But we have written too much of code just for initializing the properties. In case this example is not ready with you, please go and watch my tutorial, that is Java tutorial 36, that explains about inheritance example in the Java tutorials playlist, that is explaining about all these classes, including what all the things we write in the main method. So we are going to take the same example, but what I'm going to do is I will remove all the codes that are written in the main statement because we are going to create the object with parameterized constructors. Firstly, let me create the constructor in person class. We need to understand that the hierarchy is something like this, where employee extends person, patient extends person, then doctor and nurse extends employee. If I create a constructor in person, employee can invoke the person constructor, then doctor can invoke the employee constructor, nurse constructor can invoke the employee constructor. Patient constructor can invoke the person constructor. Through the super statements, we can do all those things. Firstly, let me create the constructor for person class. and we know there is a shortcut to generate the constructor. Let me right click and go to source, and I will select generate constructors using fields because I have only name and phone number that needs to be initialized. I will choose generate constructor using fields, and it is going to initialize name and phone number, and look at the constructor it is invoking, that is object constructor, because person class is a subclass of object. If I click on generate, I would see person constructor taking two parameters, and it is invoking the object class constructor and initializing the name and phone number. Even if you remove this statement, the compiler is going to keep the supercall statement internally. I will write one extra statement just to print this statement called person name comma phone number. This is to understand when you create the object of any subclass, what is the constructor order of invocation. As we are going to create the object of patient, doctor, and nurse, we should able to see the person constructor also getting invoked. But the moment I create this constructor, look at the employee class, it is giving a compilation error because employee extends person, as the employee constructor is invoking the default constructor of person, it is giving the error. You might be thinking, how come employee constructor invokes the default constructor? Employee as a default constructor, as we do not have any constructor inside the employee class, and that default constructor will by default invoke the default constructor of person class. So let us generate the constructor, right click and go to source and select constructor using fields. When you select that, look at the constructor, it is actually showing the person with string come along. You just keep these things as it is and click on generate. What happens is you can observe there is an employee constructor taking four arguments. These name and phone number arguments are because of the person constructor. The Eclipse will automatically generate a constructor with the parameters that would actually belong to superclass properties initialization. And ID and salary are subclass properties. And notice Eclipse is already keeping supercall. And what this statement will do is it is going to call the superclass constructor and passes whatever the name and phone number the employee constructor takes. So it is going to be person constructor taking name and phone number will be invoked. When employee constructor taking four arguments is called, it is going to pass the name and phone number to the superclass and initializes the ID and salary. So it means superclass takes care of initializing superclass members. Employee class takes care of initializing employee class member. We will print here one statement called employee name comma phone comma id comma salary. So let us generate the constructor for patient class. This is also showing error because patient extends person and it has no constructor. There is a default constructor in the patient class, it is calling the default constructor of person class. We will change this behavior. We will generate the constructor using fields, and notice person string come along is appearing. We will keep all these things as it is and click on generate. So patient constructor also takes four arguments and passes the name and phone number to the person constructor. Then it initializes the ID and issue. To understand the patient constructor is called, we will print this message patient name comma phone patient ID comma issue. Then we will generate the constructor for doctor. It is extending employee, but this is giving error because doctor as a default constructor, which is trying to find the default constructor in employee class. In employee class, there is no default constructor as it has only one constructor, that is overloaded constructor. Doctor class is giving error. Once we generate the constructor, it is going to disappear. That is, the error is going to disappear. Now, how many arguments constructor do you think it will create? Remember, employee has four arguments constructor and the doctor has two properties. So totally six arguments constructor it will generate. We need to choose generate constructor using fields, and this time it is going to be employee taking four arguments, and it is going to initialize those four arguments. Along with that, specialization and license number also will be initialized. You can observe here there is a super statement which passes name, phone, ID, salary to the superclass constructor, that is employee. Let us print the statement in the constructor to know that the doctor constructor and its parent class constructors are called. We will write here name, phone number, ID, salary, then specialization, comma, license number. You can notice that nurse class is also throwing error because nurse class as a default constructor, that is trying to find the default constructor in employee class, which is not present. We will generate the constructor in a nurse class also, but the constructor is going to call the employee class constructor taking parameters. So employee constructor taking four parameters, and shift is another extra property that will be initialized. Now you can observe it is having five arguments constructor, and this statement is going to call the employee constructor taking name, phone number, ID, and salary. Please understand, if I am saying name, phone, ID, salary, the data type of name, phone, ID, salary is what it is going to check. What is the data type of name, phone, ID, and salary in employee class? They are string, long, int, and double. And in the nurse class also, the name, phone, ID, and salary are matching to the data type. So it is applied for every subclass. Based on the data type only, the call would go. And once the superclass initializes the superclass members, subclass will initialize the subclass member, that is shift in case of nurse. Next, what we will do is we will create the objects of patient, doctor, and nurse in the main method. First, let me create the object of patient. Patient P equals new patient. We will pass some value to the name, then phone number, ID, and lastly the issue, let's say code. And please observe here, we are not calling the setter methods of name or patient ID or phone number or issue, because the constructor is taking care of initializing all the properties. Before printing each details, let me simply run this program and see what happens. You can observe the object of patient is invoking person constructor as well as the patient constructor. The reason is very simple. Patient constructor as the super call, which is here, that is calling the person constructor. And to know whether they are initialized properly or not, we will print few informations by calling the getter methods. Let me get the name of patient, get name, then issue of the patient, get issue. If I run this program, I should be able to see name is Ravi, issue is code, year, name, phone number was initialized by person, then issue and patient ID was initialized by patient class constructor. Next, we will have one delimiter, and we will create one doctor object now. D equals to new doctor. We need to pass six parameters. Let me pass some name, phone number, then ID, then salary, and specialization. We will say cardiology, then license number, some number like India, Karnataka slash some number. And once the object of doctor is created, it initializes all the properties. Let me run this program. You will see when the doctor object is created, person constructor is first invoked to initialize the name and phone number. Then employee constructor is invoked to initialize the ID and salary. Then the doctor constructor is invoked, that is going to initialize the specialization and license number. Next, what we will do is we will try to print few details like name, then ID, and specialization. so that we will come to know that all the properties are properly initialized and some properties were initialized by the superclass. To print, what we will do, we will first call the getter and we will pass the value of that getter to the print statement. First, we will call the getter of name, then we will call the getter of ID, and we will call the getter of specialization. Let me run this program. You can observe it is printing the name, the ID, and the specialization. Let us create the nurse object. Nurse n equals new nurse. We'll pass the name like Sania, phone number, then ID and salary, and lastly the shift. We have to understand here the nurse constructor is passing certain properties to the employee constructor, and employee constructor is passing certain properties to the person constructor. So if I run the program, I should see person constructor and employee constructor. I guess I have not printed the print statement in the nurse constructor. That's why it is not printing this statement name comma phone comma ID comma salary comma shift. We will write that and once again we will run the program. Now you could see when the nurse object is created, the order of constructor invocation is person initializes the name and phone, employee initializes the ID and salary, and the nurse initializes the shift. To know all these properties are rightly initialized, we will call the getter methods of few properties and print them. Firstly, name, n dot get name, then ID, n dot get ID, and lastly, shift, n dot get shift. And if I run this program, I should see nurse details, that is name is Sania, ID is 55, day shift. We have to understand here the real use case of super keyword is when there are some code present in the superclass and we want to reuse that code, which is an initialization logic. Subclass doesn't need to initialize the superclass members. Let the subclass pass the superclass members to the superclass constructor so that superclass can take care of initializing the superclass members. So that's how you use the supercall statements to initialize the superclass members. See you in the next video. Thank you so much.